the historic District 1 Schoolhouse, and we're so happy that you came to hear this forum on a very important subject. My name is Kim, and I'm from the SWAP organization, which is throwing this party here tonight. And I'd like to just briefly say a couple of events that we have coming up. This Saturday night, we have Sparky and Roger Rucker from out east. They're touring, and they decided to play this old one-room schoolhouse. They're a wonderful, wonderful duo. Sparky's not only talk the talk, he walked the walk, and he's performed with Pete Seeger and Utah Phillips and Guy Caraway. It's a wonderful act, and I'm going to turn this down quick. And then on November 18th, we have the Dangus, which is a local band, and they won a couple Mammo Awards for their wonderful bluegrass music and Americana. So if you'd like some tickets for those, I do have some available at a reduced price of $12. You will never spend $12 more wisely. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to listen to music. And with that said, I'd like to introduce someone who I've come to know through radio on the Mike 92.1, which is no longer a station that I have on my free dial. Mike Crude is now owner and operator of News Talk 1510 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, only a privately run and operated news talk station. And he's also co-host of a very popular and very educational, I found very educational and wonderful show, The Devil's Advocates. Without further ado, Mike.
Thanks everyone for coming. We've got 5 people up here to speak about following the money. And I'm going to say just a couple of quick things, and then I'm going to get out of the way primarily. Part of following the money, to my opinion, is looking at the avenues and the venues that people use to communicate. When they talk about free speech, it's not really about soapbox in the corner square. It's really about buying advertising. And I've decided what I thought was important and certainly lacking effective election day of 2016 was progressive outlets. Lefty, dim, call us what you will, we're calling ourselves Resistance Radio. And we are trying to provide a messaging venue, and it's kind of twofold. It's got to be a platform for advertising at some point. There's a lot of Dems running for governor and a lot of other races. At some point they have to differentiate themselves from one another. And we would like them to do so in a friendly way on our station. But there's also, generally there's commercial sponsorship. And what I've done is I've realized you have to tell people who's spending money politically. You don't know who's giving the money to whom, but they have to announce. The radio stations, the TV markets have to tell you who's spending the money. Well, we've looked up a few of our competitors already. Americans for Prosperity, which is associated with the Koch brothers, are spending $500 an ad currently on WISN in Milwaukee. That's pretty hefty, even for the number 41 market in America. The average ad cost is probably more like 60, 70, 80 bucks per ad on a right-wing talk radio station, unless you're a friendly donor group. They're included in the giving. When you buy ads at 500 bucks a whack, that is purely to make sure that you've got a receptive place to go put your message out there. So anyways, my little take on this money in politics thing, we aren't going to beat, my opinion, beat back what's happening currently in this country or this state without some sort of platforms of communication. And I think it's really important. And that's why I went out and in way over my head buying a radio station. As a single guy, well, I'm married, but my poor wife's getting dragged along in this process. because you have to have the platform, and the platform was taken away in Madison. It is a voter turnout mechanism for the right, for the left. Whoever's willing to invest in talk radio will see a higher percentage of voters turn out. You will energize people to get out and vote. The right is invested in there. They effectively give money right to the station managers by the bagful. Well, that's what we're up against, and basically it's me and 5 other guys, and they're all making more than 15 bucks an hour, but not a lot more than that. And we're doing the best we can. But more importantly, there are great organizations, and we'd like to think we're a platform for educating people. Because guys like, we call him Batman, Matt Rothschild with the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, they're doing excellent work. And he's in every op-ed page, and we try to provide a platform for Matt and his organization. But if guys like Matt aren't paying attention and don't tell you where the money's at, or at least track it as well as they can, you don't know. And it's not just one site spending. Tammy Baldwin's PAC spent $26,000 with WTMJ last month. That's my direct competitor. They didn't spend any money on the left. That's a whiny complaint of a broke radio operator. Matt Rothschild's here, he's great. We call him Batman. Mary Bottari is pinch hitting tonight. Mary Bottari is also excellent. And I'm gonna let you guys get started. But the Follow the Money Forum, I introduce my friend Batman Matt Rothschild, Wisconsin Democracy Campaign.
Thanks, Trudy. Don and Trudy do a great show, 15:10 a.m. You can hear it almost all the way into Madison on I-94. You can get it on your computer anytime you want. It's an incredible show. They did an incredible job here in Madison on 92.1 when they were Devil's Advocates here. And he's really taken a courageous step here, financially, personally for him, but also a crucial step for, I think, the progressive movement in Wisconsin to just buy our own media, get our own stations, and not rely on corporate owners to tell us what we can say and when we can say it. So if you can support what Trudy's doing there with Devil's Advocates, Resistance Radio down in Milwaukee, please do and tune in whenever you can. So it's always great to be back in Mount Horeb. I was over at the wrong building here for a minute there. I didn't realize I was going to be at an American Legion event, but that's what it was. Anyway, it's good to see all you here and a lot of friends here. I want to cut to the chase. We don't really have a functioning democracy in America anymore. That's the basic fact. And Jimmy Carter said it best on Progressive Radio with Tom Hartman about 2 years ago when he said, we no longer have a democracy in America. We've got an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. Unlimited political bribery. And that's what we've got. We've got it nationwide. We've got it here in Wisconsin. Even Donald Trump in the first Republican debate, remember when there were like 13 candidates there? Even Scott Walker, who doesn't cast a shadow at 5 o'clock on a sunny day, was up there with them. And you got Donald Trump saying, look, I've paid money to most of these people here, and when I call them up, they do what I want them to do. And people understand that that's how rigged the system is. In fact, Trump was shoplifting from the store that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren opened up because, he used the word rigged constantly in his campaign, and that's what Bernie's been saying, Elizabeth Warren's been saying for years. In fact, you could YouTube Elizabeth Warren and the word rig, and you'd see a great 5-minute spiel from her about how the system's rigged. And Trump knows a good line when he steals it, so, he just took that rigged line and went with it. But, things have gotten worse. Well, first of all, they've gotten worse here in Wisconsin. And they got worse for a couple reasons. They got worse because of the corrupt Wisconsin Supreme Court, which the conservative justices threw out the John Doe 2 investigation of Scott Walker. Remember what that was about? There was a law in the books at the time that said if you're a candidate, you can't coordinate with an outside group. And what was Walker doing? He was going all around the state and all around the country, sitting on the laps of millionaires and billionaires saying, don't write me a check for Scott Walker for governor, write a check to Wisconsin Club for Growth, and then my campaign manager, who also runs Wisconsin Club for Growth, will use that money to help keep me in power and keep Republican senators in power. So it was clear that he was in fact coordinating with the outside group, Wisconsin Club for Growth. these billionaires, you know, the lead manufacturer in Texas, or you had John Menard, or you had, you know, he goes to Vegas to talk to Sheldon Adelson, not because he wants to go play Texas Hold'em, because he wants Sheldon Adelson's money. And some of these rich people would write out checks for $1 million or $1.5 million, and they'd write in the memo line, Scott Walker asked. And it wasn't just Scott Walker, as I said, it was Wisconsin Club for Growth. So that looked like it was blatantly illegal. And what did the Wisconsin Supreme Court do? They threw it out with a bizarre and unprecedented interpretation of the First Amendment that the U.S. Supreme Court has never bought. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted the First Amendment on campaign finance issues quite differently. But they said that the state of Wisconsin cannot ban candidates from coordinating with outside issue advocacy groups. That the First Amendment prohibits the state of Wisconsin from doing that, which was a ludicrous interpretation both of the First Amendment and of U.S. Supreme Court precedent on campaign finance, but that's what they did. And so they got Walker off the hook, and they also ended the John Doe investigation and opened the field for the next shoe that dropped, which was the state legislature passed a law that Walker quickly signed in November 2015, and I remember I was in the Senate gallery late one Thursday night in November 2015. It was just about me. There was no other citizen up there except a page who was about 21 years old and a state Capitol Police officer up in the gallery. The gallery was empty. And they went about their dirty business destroying our campaign finance law, which is called Chapter 11, which I used to think was bankruptcy, but now it's fittingly our bankrupt political system, Chapter 11. And what they did with the statute was make it more easy for super wealthy people and corporations to buy our legislature. And they did it in several ways. First, they doubled the amount of money that rich people can give to their favorite candidate. I mean, it's absurd. In the United States, your favorite candidate for president, you can give $2,700. In Wisconsin, it used to be $10,000. And now, actually, it's $20,000 for governor. So rich and poor alike in Wisconsin give $20,000 to their favorite candidate for governor. And so they made it out of the reach of almost everybody. You and I don't have an equal voice with the people who can pull out a checkbook and write checks for $20,000. I mean, it's just as basic as that. And then they also said something that would make fighting Bob LaFoll's corpse get dizzier and dizzier. They said corporations for the first time in more than 100 years can now donate to political parties and legislative campaign committees, which they're doing in spades. And finally, they rewrote the definition of coordination so that not only can candidates now coordinate with outside issue advocacy groups are groups that don't use the magic words vote for or vote against, but they made it almost impossible to convict candidates who are actually coordinating with express advocacy groups that say vote for this candidate or don't vote for that candidate, because they define the word coordination in such a way as to make it kind of ludicrous. They said it's not illegal unless the candidate explicitly asks the express advocacy group to do something, and then an official from the express advocacy group explicitly assents to the ask from the candidate. So, you know, I could say to a group that I'm working with, or Walker could say to Wisconsin Club for Growth, I got a great idea, I've got this great ad, maybe it'd be a good idea for you to run this ad in the following 10 stations, and the person from Wisconsin Club for Growth would say, yeah, we'll consider that. Maybe it's a good idea, we'll look into it, and it's all done with a wink and a nod, and everybody understands that there was an agreement, but there was an explicit agreement, and so they get away with it. It's made a mockery of our ability here to control, limit the amount of money that individuals can give and to require adequate disclosure that's necessary for our democracy to function. For instance, right now, if I'm running for governor and I've got a billionaire friend, lucky me, I'm going to tell my billionaire friend, you know, don't even think about writing that $20,000 check to my campaign because I've got a better idea. Why don't you write a check for $2 million to an outside group with some funky antiseptic name like Badgers for Eternal Victory. Write the $2 million check to Bev, and guess what? I'll give you the ad, I'll give Bev the ad, and tell them where to run the ad, and they'll run the ad all over the state. It'll be just like you gave me the $2 million, except that it's 100 times the legal limit, and the kicker is Bev doesn't have to disclose that you gave them a single dime because these issue advocacy groups don't have to disclose. So we won't know, and it's a total end around our campaign finance system. That's how things are working right now. And so this is about as corrupt as you can get. And we see the effect of the corruption down the line, issue after issue. I mean, first there was the labor issue, of course. And I just want to put it to you this way. Scott Walker does not run the state of Wisconsin. And Scott Fitzgerald doesn't run the state of Wisconsin. Diane Hendricks runs the state of Wisconsin. John Menard runs the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce sure run the state of Wisconsin. They're the biggest business lobby in the state. Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers group, runs Wisconsin. American Federation for Children, Betsy DeVos's private school voucher group, runs the state of Wisconsin. She's poured $8.5 million into Wisconsin over the last 7 years to defund our public schools and to siphon that money into the voucher schools. That's who's running the state. And Walker and Fitzgerald and Voss and everybody else in power right now are just the water boys for those business special interests. That's who runs the show. And Diane Hendricks of ABC Supply down in Beloit. You guys saw the movie As Goes Janesville, the Janesville movie? I mean, it's right there, or you can go Google it when you go home. Diane Hendricks, Scott Walker documentary. This is after Scott Walker won the election the first time, 2010, before he's taken power. There's a documentary filmmaker making a movie about Janesville, and he's got his camera rolling while Diane Hendricks goes up to Scott Walker and says, when are you going to make Wisconsin into a red state? When are you going to make Wisconsin into a right-to-work state? And what does Walker say? Infamously, first we're going to divide and conquer. Crudy was running that quote in an ad that he's got going, that Don's got going on his station. First we're going to divide and conquer, and that's what he did. He went after public sector workers, and then he made this state a right-to-work state. He gave Wisconsin on a platter to Diane Hendricks. Diane Hendricks, Scott Walker's single biggest contributor, has given more than $500,000 to Walker directly. There was a loophole in the recall law, and still is on the books, that you can give unlimited amounts during parts of the recall campaign. So she was able to give more than the $10,000 or the $20,000 to Walker. She gave $500,000 during the recall campaign. And she gave $5 million to his presidential super PAC. So, you know, she's got the governor of Wisconsin in her back pocket. And that's how the system goes. So it's kind of a sorry state we're in, and the reason I'm not drawing a hot bath and getting out of a razor blade is because there is exciting stuff going on here in Wisconsin on a couple issues, including this very issue. There's a great group in Wisconsin called Wisconsin United to Amend that has passed resolutions in 115 communities, including the village of Mount Horeb, which says, with 84% approval, by the way, that's something to be proud of. That says we need to amend the Constitution to proclaim once and for all that corporations aren't actually persons, and that money isn't actually speech, because this is the nub of the problem. We have U.S. Supreme Court decisions that are terrible too. I got to say, before I get to those, that Wisconsin is second only to Massachusetts in the number of communities that have signed on to this resolution, so we have something to be proud of. And I've been trying to interest some mainstream media reporters on this, because all people hear is how bad things are in Wisconsin. If you look at the grassroots, things aren't bad. People are moving, people are organizing, people are agitating and scoring some successes. So, but that's the Supreme Court decision. You know, the shorthand is we need this constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, the horrible 2010 U.S. Supreme Court decision that said corporations can dip into their treasury and spend absolutely as much money to say, vote for this candidate or trash that candidate. But it's shorthand because the U.S. Supreme Court bad precedence on this issue goes back to 1888 with a decision called Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, where the U.S. Supreme Court in a footnote said corporations are persons. All of a sudden, they waved their magic gavel and made corporations into persons. And so that's been on the books now for 137 years, or whatever the math is. And then there was the Buckley versus Vallejo decision in 1976 that said money equals speech. And then there was the McCutcheon decision in 2014 that said you can't limit in an aggregate basis what a single individual can contribute, because some rich right-winger had contributed like $300,000 to all these different candidates, and he thought his free speech was being infringed upon because there was something like a $300,000 limit on how much he could give in his state, and that was thrown out. So we need to just tear down that whole edifice of horrible U.S. Supreme Court decisions if we really have any decent chance of getting real democracy here in this country. The other exciting issue is, of course, the redistricting issue. You know, the terrible gerrymandering that happened, the terribly corrupt gerrymandering that happened in 2010 here, the rigging of the maps by Walker and the Fitzgeralds and Voss. You know, they're supposed to do the people's business in public, and redistricting is supposed to be done by the legislature, it's the public's business. Did they do it in public? No, they went across the street from the Capitol and did it in the glass bank there, in the private law offices of Michael Best and Friedrich, in something that became called the map room, the locked map room. You weren't invited, the public wasn't invited, the media wasn't invited in the locked map room, Democrats weren't invited in the locked map room, even Republican legislators who weren't in leadership weren't allowed to go in the locked map room until they got permission from one of the staffers from the leadership who held the key to open the door so that they could go in there. And once they went in there and saw their redrawn districts, they had to swear an oath of secrecy about what they saw in there. That's not doing the people's business in public like it's supposed to. So there are a couple good things that have happened on this issue. There's the great U.S. Supreme Court case that was heard on October 3rd, and we'll get a decision before next June, and there's a good shot that we're going to win, that the good guys are going to win this case. And I happened to be at the Blue Federal Building in Madison when they were hearing the case, and the lawyers for the good guys were just incredible. The closing argument by the lawyer for the good guys was something straight out of To Kill a Mockingbird and Gregory Peck. So it was thrilling to see, and horrifying but good was the totally inept response by Brad Schimmel's deputy, who came up to bat next, and after this great attorney for the plaintiffs had said, you know, it's Memorial Day weekend, people have died for our freedoms and equal representation and democracy, the young attorney for the Attorney General comes up and says, I should be in Door County right now. My wife and I were supposed to be vacationing in Door County right now, but this case has dragged on so long that I can't be in Door County. And actually, whenever I think about Door County, I just think of what district it is and what the shape of the district is. You know, he just rambled on like this, and it was just the most pathetic bit of lawyering I'd ever seen in my life. But it was good for us. And actually, Anthony Kennedy's questioning at the Supreme Court, and the liberals questioning, the other liberals questioning at the Supreme Court was a hopeful sign that we might win. But there's even an additional hopeful thing on the redistricting issue that gets back to the grassroots activism that is so exciting to me in this state. Because just in the last 9 months, 23 counties in Wisconsin have signed on to resolutions saying they want to change the way we do redistricting in Wisconsin, to take it out of the hands of the elected officials and the party in power, to make it totally nonpartisan like they have in Iowa, so the career civil servants will draw the maps with specific criteria that completely ban the use of political demographic data, and so you can't skew the lines to help one party or another. Whichever party is in power shouldn't be able to mess with the maps like that. So, you know, that's 9 months, 23 counties is pretty incredible. And then the Wisconsin Counties Association, not the most radical group right here in Wisconsin, was at Wisconsin Dells a month ago, and they passed a resolution with about 57 counties on board saying they want to move the state away from this partisan redistricting and do redistricting the way they do in Iowa. Iowa's been doing it in a nonpartisan way for more than 35 years. We can work in Iowa. If they make it work in Iowa, we can make it work right here in Wisconsin. So that's what's exciting for me. And there's one final thing that's exciting for me. I'm working now at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. I'm also on the board of Wisconsin Voices, which is an umbrella organization of more than 50 nonprofit progressive organizations in Wisconsin. I was just at a board meeting down in Milwaukee all day today. And we are all working together. You know, there's this assumption that, you know, we're still in our silos and we're, you know, the environmentalists are here, the labor people are here, ACLU's here, Planned Parenthood is here, good government groups are here, environmental groups there. We're all working together. In fact, at 11 o'clock every other Friday, I'm on a phone call with other pro-democracy nonprofit representatives. We're saying, you know, what are the horrible bills that we need to address, like the riot bills, for instance, that I've been testifying against, or other bills. And, you know, who's going to testify, who's going to write the press release, who's going to have the press conference, you know, what can we do, what street action can we have if we need a street action. We're all working together. We've torn down the silos, we've shelved the egos, and we're you know, plowing the ground for getting the state back so we can once again finally say we're proud to be from Wisconsin. So thanks very much. And
Cool, so Matt talked quite a bit about money in campaigns and elections, and he's an expert in that. The Wisconsin Democracy Campaign is an invaluable resource in the state of Wisconsin. And I'm Mary Bottari from the Center for Media and Democracy, and I wanted to talk a little bit about other money that's flowing around the state that isn't just the campaigns and elections issue. And this year, over the summer, we obtained 57,000 files from the Bradley Foundation, that were unbelievably hacked by international hackers during the election cycle last year. And they were put out on this very obscure website in Poland, don't ask. And we downloaded the files and we took a look at them. We were very curious about the Bradley Foundation, which, as you know, is like a $900 million foundation in Milwaukee and one of the biggest influencers in our state. We worked with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel on a series of articles. They wrote 6 and we wrote 11 articles on what was in these 56,000 documents. So if I had a board, if I had chalk, I would tell you a little bit more about this. But the Bradley Foundation, I mean, most of you know this foundation, right? Its reputation was built on, or at least in my time here in Wisconsin, its reputation was built on the issue of school vouchers, school choice. They've been a huge proponent of this. They work very closely with Betsy DeVos to bring vouchers to Wisconsin and to Milwaukee first, and then they're spreading across the state. This is a long-term effort to privatize the education system that comes out of Milton Friedman, back at the University of Chicago School of Economists. So to my mind, they were about school choice. Well, when you pull back the curtain and you look at these 57,000 files, they like to talk about something called the Wisconsin Network. And their goal is to take the Wisconsin Network national. So we know what the Wisconsin Network is. We've encountered a lot of these institutions, but I want to run down them because these are the institutions that are working hard every day to block anything good that's happening in the state of Wisconsin. So they created a metric that they scored the Wisconsin Network on, they scored the Wisconsin Network on, and then they want to take those components and they want to take them into other states, especially swing states. They want to do this. So one of their items on their metric is the grassroots. So the Bradley Foundation isn't well known for this, but they fund these various grassroots entities, including, I was sort of surprised to see in the documents, that they provided $100,000 for the first Americans for Prosperity office in Wisconsin. Those are the Koch brothers. Like, the Koch brothers need money. I mean, cut me a break. And I consider AFP a Koch organization. I consider it the key Koch organization, not a tied to organization. I mean, it's run by Tim Phillips, and he takes his orders directly from the brothers. And I don't know, has anybody from AFP ever knocked on your door here in Mount Horeb? Okay, the last election cycle, now this is usually a C3 organization, a charitable organization, it also has a C4. Last election cycle, they had 16 offices open in the state of Wisconsin, okay, where they had quote-unquote volunteers handing out literature and going door to door with these tablets, doing very sophisticated voter interviews. And they weren't, you know, if you ever knocked on doors to the Democratic Party, or you ever knocked on doors to the Republican Party, you're given a list, right? You're given a list. John Jones, 123 South whatever street. You go knock on John Jones's doors because he's an identified Republican, right? If you're working for the Republican Party. Then you skip 3 houses and you go to the next Republican. Then you skip 3 houses, right? These people don't do that. They knock on every door and they ask you, and they're adorable children. And there are armies and armies and armies of very young children. And they like to call them volunteers, but they're getting paid, and we know that because we sent a few people to volunteer one day. So they send out scads of kids to create extremely sophisticated voter bases. And they also, by the way, hand out educational literature about how wonderful Ron Johnson is at the same time. And so it's only issues, we're talking issues here, but we're talking millions and millions of dollars flowing into the state that we don't even know about. Okay, back to the Bradley Foundation. So Bradley supports grassroots groups, including like Hispanics for School Choice and all these like phony groups. And then they also, they don't say this in their documents, they don't call them candidates, they call them grassroots leaders. They support grassroots leaders. And in doing that, they support a group called American Majority, which is apparently huge in Wisconsin. It's trained thousands and thousands and thousands of people in Wisconsin. And this is candidate training. They don't call it this, but this is what it is. The organization was founded by Republicans to train Republicans to run for office. And it also considers itself a C3 charity. Then, of course, they cultivate politicians, and they fund American Legislative Exchange Council. And I know most folks here know what the American Legislative Exchange Council is. We published all their bills in 2011, 800 ALEC model bills. And it's a place where lobbyists and legislators get together behind closed doors and they vote on model bills, which then show up in your state usually stripped of their ALEC origins, right? People don't stand up and say, hey, the PVC pipe industry gave me this bill, so now I'm introducing it here in Wisconsin because they want those PVC pipes in your, in your community. They don't say that, so the only way you know it's an ALEC bill is either you talk to folks like us, or you do your Googling to try and find our ALEC bills that we published, and we tried to keep it up to date with new ALEC bills. So that's ALEC. It's a $9 million organization. It does a lot of damage just being a small $9 million organization. It pales in comparison to the State Policy Network, which is a $90 million organization of state-based think tanks, which is heavily funded by the Bradley Foundation. These think tanks, we found out that Bradley has given these think tanks something like $138 million. Can folks name the think tanks in Wisconsin? MacIver Institute is one of them. What's the other one? Wisconsin Public Research Institute, is that what it's called? Which has just changed its name to the Badger Institute. And they were tweeting out their new Badger logo and all this kind of stuff. And we kept tweeting back, you're the Bradley Institute, call yourself the Bradley Institute. Because the Bradley Foundation has given them $13 million over the years. And if Bradley had, I'm sure that's their primary, if not only, source of funding. And these groups work hand in hand with ALEC. This is how it works in Wisconsin, and ALEC legislate, well, let me get to that in a minute. Let me go through some other institutions first. So we have those two State Policy Network think tanks here. The Bradley Foundation funds them not just here, but across the nation. And then we have, the Bradley Foundation is very big into media. So they not only fund a whole bunch of right-wing publishers, book publishers, they fund right-wing media, films, educational videos. The list of media institutions that they fund is enormous. And on top of that, they fund all these other institutions like ALEC and the State Policy Network to upgrade their websites and their infrastructure and all that kind of thing. And here in Wisconsin, there was a thing called the Wisconsin Reporter. Do you guys know the Wisconsin Reporter? Little right-wing newspaper? You guys should be reading what the enemy is up to, you know? So it was this right-wing internet site, and it was run primarily by a guy named Matt Kittle, and it was part of a larger group of institutions called the Franklin Center for Government Integrity. For a while there, it sort of blossomed and faded. It had some big funder, and seems to have lost the big funder. But while it was fading, the Bradley Institute really wanted to keep Matt Kittle alive. So they funded the Wisconsin branch of the institution. Matt Kittle has credentials to be in the Wisconsin Capitol. He is a credentialized reporter, but really he is the Bradley Foundation's mouthpiece. And what did he do during the whole John Doe? He wrote 385 articles attacking prosecutors' wives, just viciously framing this as a witch hunt with no merit whatsoever. The guy couldn't read a campaign finance statute if he were paid to. And he has just kept up the drumbeat still today, yet today. Even though Wisconsin Reporter has sort of folded, he has moved to, guess where? The MacIver Institute to keep up this blog and this reporting on these issues. So when Kevin Kennedy, who used to head our Government Accountability Board, went to a big ethics meeting of all the ethics regulators in the United States and talked about the John Doe, Matt Kittle wrote an article and got all these legislators involved to attack him viciously for breaking John Doe secrecy laws while he was talking about what happened in the John Doe at this ethics meeting. And let me just tell you, I mean, Kevin Kennedy is the nerdiest nerd on the planet. I kept saying, what did he say? What did he say? It must be really fascinating. He didn't say anything. He had some headlines from some articles that were published up on the wall. So they keep up this sort of vicious drumbeat of attacks on liberals and folks who want to do good in this state. And so the last piece of their infrastructure, the Wisconsin network that I want to talk about, is litigation. And so once you've passed, legislators have bought this sort of foreign agenda to the state of Wisconsin, and they've passed these crazy laws, then of course they're going to need litigation because folks are going to challenge those crazy laws. And so they have built up the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, WILL. Has anybody heard of WILL? And Rick Essenberg. They have built up this institution from like a $1 million institution to a $4 or $5 million institution. And it becomes and they want it to be a regional hub for litigation, not just for the state of Wisconsin, but for all over. And, WILL is just a fascinating shop. They not only do not very scientific studies on school choice in Wisconsin, but they were out there privately enforcing Act 10, the Walker's union busting legislation, on cities and county governments. That's really backing up the agenda. So the Bradley Foundation is very proud of this Wisconsin network because they feel they built the infrastructure for what has happened in Wisconsin, and now it's their job to export it to other states. And so here's just an illustration of how it works. So Matt mentioned what right to work, which is the legislation attacking private sector unions that we passed. So Act 10 was 2011, and we attacked public sector unions. And then in 2015, there was a bill attacking private sector unions. But before the bill was introduced, there was this grassroots rumbling, and a website popped up saying, Wisconsinites for Right to Work. And sure enough, the person who popped up the website used to work for Americans for Prosperity. And so first there's the grassroots demand that, the people are demanding right to work, which is legislation that's usually found in southern states. It's union-busting legislation, makes it hard for people to organize, and it has a long semi-racist history. So this phony grassroots site pops up. The next thing you know, it's sort of people are starting chattering about it in the newspapers. Next thing you know, the bill is introduced. Lo and behold, it's a verbatim ALEC bill, which we pointed out to them and then did the side-by-side. And after we did the side-by-side, they still denied it was a verbatim ALEC bill. And then it's, guess who's introducing it? Well, all the ALEC politicians, including Leah Buchmeier, who's the vice president of ALEC at the time. And then who comes in to testify at the hearing? Well, it's State Policy Network scholars from all over. From, the MacIver Institute brings in someone from here, and someone else brought in an ALEC scholar who does these cookie cutter studies on right to work for each state. And who's reporting what a wonderful, great idea it is? Well, there's Matt Kittle reporting on how wonderful and what a great idea this is. And who's backing it up with specialized lawyerly testimony, and then fighting doing amicus briefs to fight the unions who are fighting it in the courts and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. So this structure exists. It's very sophisticated. Sometimes you can even spot them on TV. Like you could see the ALEC legislator there with the think tank guy there and with the Wisconsin reporter guy there, and they're all being interviewed like they're three separate actors in our society when they're all being funded by the same enormous, deep-pocketed ideological interests. So it's important for citizens like us to understand this infrastructure and what's going on. Because, the more we understand this kind of stuff, the more we can outvote these guys. And it's also important if you have those little AFP people knocking on your door, American Federation people knocking on your door to ask you about your voting habits, that you ask them questions. You say, it's so nice to meet you. How many of you are there? And how many offices are there in the state of Wisconsin? And where's your office, by the way? And just learn as much as you can about this effort. Are you getting paid? How much are you getting paid? learn as much as you can about this and, answer their questions because you want to hear what the questions are, right? I don't know what the questions are. I haven't, unfortunately, been able to encounter this. So, and then report back to us because we're very curious about all this. And another election cycle is coming up and they are advertising again for volunteers to go knock on doors for them. So I will leave it at that and we'll open the session, I think, to questions.
Real quick, and I'll get to you first, sir. Before we go into questions, I want to just emphasize one part of what I think they both touched on. 501c3s. Now, we've also dabbled in that sort of political mischief. We got a real attorney, former Government Accountability Board staff attorney, and had them set up a 501c3. And I don't know if I can overemphasize enough the fact this is like a Christmas present to the rich. It's tax deductible. It's corporate or private. The actual 501c3 is like a gift to the rich. They're using it in tax avoidance. It's not just a political contribution. It is much better from a businessman's point of view to give money to a 501c3 because Scott Walker asked than to actually give money to Scott Walker. Because to give money to Scott Walker is not a tax deductible act. Look on his website. He'll spell it out there. What he's telling you is, oh, don't bother. He'll take your small dollar contributions because he likes to build the data list. That's also currency for him. But the 501c3 is an amazing tax avoidance tool of the rich. And quite frankly, it's anonymous. It's an anonymous shell corporation. It's a front. We've got one, we called it the People for People Corporation. And right in my founding charter, it's just an IRS designation that allows us to take tax deductible, private or corporate, dark money donations, anonymously, never have to tell anyone, uncapped, could be $1 billion. And you wouldn't even know if it came from a foreign corporation based in Taiwan. It could be an enormous amount of money that flows through the state of Wisconsin in the next year, and we will never know where it's coming from. And the vehicles of that money is the 501c3s. And I know Matt Kittle. I got Matt Kittle's phone number. Matt Kittle, I'll tell you, comes off as a very nice guy. Matt Kittle, all the time, is on Right Wing Talk Radio. He is a fill-in host. He's done my show a number of times. And you meet him, you'd have a beer with him. You'd think, what a nice young man. But he always knows where the bread is buttered. And he always knows what motivates him. Rick Essenberg, brilliant guy. Rick's also been on my show. Seems quite reasonable, but you can never push him for an actual genuine answer. He is always on the company line. Because these guys are paid propaganda pieces for the Bradley Foundation, the arms that they work for, be it MacGyver now or whatever the case may be. Last update, and then we'll take your questions. I went to dinner on Friday night last at the Milwaukee Press Club Hall of Fame. And first guy I saw there, Robin Voss and his new wife, fresh off their honeymoon. Friendliest I've ever seen the man. He actually made a point of walking over and shaking my hand. And they were there as the guests of Charlie Sykes. Because his new wife, Michelle Lichkins, is also part of Charlie Sykes' television network. It's very incestuous, and it's way worse than a 10 or 15 minute conversation can possibly relay to you. And they are so well funded. And, quite frankly, the guys on the left, I can't speak to the nonprofits. I don't understand how some of this networking and stuff goes. But I can just tell you, there's like me, and there's like 3 or 4 independent newspapers, and that's it. And there's no Soros money. There's not even Democratic Party money. There's no money. The Democrats don't understand and are not investing the same way. And I don't think it's because they're staying above the fray. They're not doing so out of high moral attitude. They just don't get it. They don't get that they're getting their asses kicked. So that's my little thought. Sir, you had the first question.
Yeah, I want to go back